Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a Star Wars Legion podcast bringing you the latest news, general perspective, and competitive discussion.
Hello and welcome back to the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle. I'm here with Mike and Jay.
Hi.
Are you really here with us, though?
You're not here with us.
I'm not physically there with you, who are physically there with each other.
Yeah, we're in Studio De La Fifth Trooper over here at the Shalansky compound.
Yeah,
It really is a compound. There's chickens outside.
We got chickens running around. We got kids running around. We got all kinds of crazy stuff going on.
I think usually they call it a farm. Compound kind of brings like a
Yeah, no, I like the compound thing.
cultish feel.
No,
That's kind of how it feels.
Yes, compound.
Okay.
I offered him some Kool-Aid earlier.
Yeah. There's fences you can't see over.
Yeah.
And,
I see.
You don't really know where you are on a map.
yeah. It's kind of.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, that is very exciting that you two are there together.
Good job, Kyle, moving the podcast along. Keep
Yeah,
going, buddy.
I mean, somebody has to, you know.
Yeah.
There you go.
Before we get to our topics for the day, do you have any housekeeping?
Yeah, we do. So we have been working on a very special project that we actually just disclosed on our Patreon podcast. So this is kind of, I think we mentioned this last week, you know, if you subscribe to Patreon, that we tell you behind the scenes stuff and new things coming up months before they come up. And that was one of the things. Right, Mike?
Yeah, that may or may not be why Jay and I are in the same building presently.
Yeah.
Because we're just kind of working on some finishing touches. So if you're interested in that, you know, make sure that you check out our Patreon After Dark podcast, where we kind of give people a little bit of lowdown ahead of time.
You can get it for any dollar amount Patreon subscription. So if you just give us $1 a month, you can listen to the After Dark episodes. Not only do you get teases about what's coming up, Kyle's not there. Number 2, number 3.
Yeah, actually, I'd like, as long as we're on that. Can we talk about how when we record After Dark, we don't have to wait 10 minutes for Kyle to finish eating his ice cream?
His Wheaties.
It was very crunchy. I didn't want to be talking with all these chocolate chips in my mouth.
Okay, all right.
But
we
we
usually
also,
BS for like 20 minutes before the cast anyway. So.
That's fair. That's fair.
yeah, that was kind of like that, except for real crunchy. So we discuss behind the scenes stuff that we're working on. We talk about, you know, Mike and I did some theory crafting, list building a couple episodes again. We'll probably do that again. We had Bushman on the other day, and we were talking about events and like what to expect at events. So there's a lot of stuff that you can get that sometimes we don't get to on either of the two public casts. So highly recommend supporting us. And you know, like when Mike comes over and I got to get a microphone out for him, our Patreon members help support that stuff. And like when events come up again, like Adepticon and stuff, and where they're streaming, it's because of our Patreon supporters. So you know, if you want to see great content continue to happen from us, that's how you do it. You support us on Patreon. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yes, please do. That's also the blog. And
Yeah.
I mean, really anything like the products, all this stuff. So,
Yep. It supports everything you love about the Fifth Trooper,
yep.
especially Kyle.
Okay. So I think the other thing that we'd probably want to talk about today, housekeeping wise, is order tokens.
Yeah. So order tokens, we got brand new designs, 6 new designs. We did the 4 factions again, completely different designs. Again, these are unique. The likelihood of us reprinting these is slim, to maybe none. I haven't really decided, but I think slim. So this may be your only chance to get these designs. So we have the 4 new faction designs. And then we have the Notorious Scoundrels and the Fifth Trooper designs. Now, those we'll probably reprint. Those are versions of the other tokens that we had of those 2. So we'll probably reprint those. But the faction ones are the ones that we're going to probably rotate every so often. So, you know, if you haven't had a chance to pre-order them. They're going to be here next month, actually, in a couple weeks. So I'm really excited about that. And then anybody who pre-ordered sidebars, I don't know, any day now. we're waiting on the boat to touch into port and then them to ship them to us. So I'm hoping any day now.
Probably got stopped in the Suez Canal. It's fine.
Yeah.
That is like unclogged by this point, I assume.
Yeah, but who
Well,
knows
it's
anymore?
unclogged. I believe the ship is still there because they were holding it basically for ransom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
For like it was a lot of money, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was like $1 billion or something.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no sweat. Hey, if you join our Patreon, we could get that boat out of the Suez Canal.
I don't know about that. All right. Is that it for housekeeping?
Probably.
For this week, I think you can expect more to come in the coming weeks, probably.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
But
We're really the secret project. I'm telling you, we're really excited about it. It's different than anything we've done so far, and different than anything that's out there. So I'm Mike and I have been working so hard on this that we're getting close to the launch here, and we're besides ourselves. As you can tell, we're a little punch drunk tonight because we've been working on this thing. So
yeah, I've been here for like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
Today, and I'll be here a couple more days this week. So we're just kind of finalizing some touches. And if you're interested in not joining the Patreon, and you know somebody that is, I'm sure they're down for talking about it. So
faux show.
We're going the grapevine route for now so that you all can get the word out. You'll hear it officially from us eventually.
I think they call that a pyramid scheme.
Pyramid scheme.
That's exactly the
fifth.
I've been watching
pyramid.
I've been watching those documentaries about the fire festivals, so that's really where we're at.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it just dropped out of my head. I did have one final one.
That's not the first time he said something about the fire festival.
So I don't know when you're going to listen to this, but Monday of this week, we actually started an Instagram account as well. And so with this special project, we'll probably be teasing stuff on the Instagram account. So the Fifth Trooper on Instagram, however you follow that, I don't actually know how it works because it's beyond my years, but I'm an old man now. I just signed this up and I'm going to start posting pictures. So God knows what's going to happen. So.
Oh boy. All right. Yeah. And in that vein, I think you can look out for social media updates across all our platforms, probably.
But I just really want them to follow
TikTok?
us on Instagram.
Yeah,
sure.
Is TikTok really a social media platform?
I don't know.
I honestly don't know what it is.
All I know is that you dance or something. So we'll get some music. Mike and I'll dance and we'll tell you about our new product.
All right. I would definitely want to see that.
That's the only thing he'll see of ours, but yeah.
Ouch.
Sorry, Kyle. Full of it today.
Yeah.
Rachel made us a really nice dinner. It's like
It was excellent.
Yeah.
We had some.
We're full and happy.
Weird looking hamburgers.
Yep.
And some awesome fettuccine Alfredo.
Yep.
So.
And
That
brownies.
sounds like a delicious combination.
It was great.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's get to Legion. So today we're going to talk about Jedi. There was a request.
We do have a request. I would like to just point out in like somewhat Legion news, I guess, the AA5 and the LAT came out this week.
They did. Yes, I have not opened mine yet. The box is enormous.
Yeah, they're gigantic. Jay's got 2 LATs and an AA5 sitting out in various states of disrepair at the moment. And it looks like there are a lot of pieces.
Yep,
like
they sure are.
Pieces. I'm not sure I've seen a Legion kit that quite it has even. You open the LAT, and there was what, like 10 spurs.
Yeah, it's complex, and the instructions are all right, but like some of the pieces you're kind of like, I think this goes here. And you're just like I think that whole like interior, exterior, moving door, like there's a lot of crazy stuff going on that I had to really focus on.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I've seen all kinds of crazy conversions that people are already doing with both of these vehicles. There's a lot of room for memes, especially with the AA5,
Yeah.
but just in general because they're like open kits where you can put stuff inside the vehicle. I've seen lots of conversions with people taking random trooper models, other stuff. I saw somebody put a gonk droid in the front seat of one of the AA5s. So lots of different. The best idea I've seen so far for the AA5 was somebody actually making it like the van from Dumb and Dumber with the dog ears and the furry.
That's good.
Yeah.
I saw as a helpful one, if you're running the lat for clones, if you pull one of the figures out of the ATRT, you can have him sit like you can have the unit with you gotta get arms from regular clone trooper, but you can have him sit like on the edge of like he's like in Vietnam or something.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
just hanging off the edge of like a Huey.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool. I saw a couple pictures like that on Facebook today. So, Legion is still happening, which is pretty awesome. We are starting to have in-person events, but releases are still happening too, so enjoy your flats and AA5s, everybody.
And keep posting those ridiculous paint jobs.
I
saw one lat that was like photorealistic. I'm like, how is this painted? It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, I think I saw that one too. That was and it was like a day after I got mine. I'm like, what? How did they do that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
People are incredible. Speaking of painting, thanks everybody for your B2 suggestions. I did end up going with just like a little shoulder thingy.
You wussed out.
Disappointed.
On the thing. Yeah. Such a shame.
So the primary reason for that is because it's easier to not do that.
Sure.
Well, clearly, if everybody took the easy way out, where would we be in this life?
No, I mean, the models have to be based for Atlantic City, which is in, 3 weeks?
Sure.
And, ideally, like if you do that properly, you want to stick the heads in the basing material when you base them. So I'd need to be doing it like now. And I still have other stuff to paint for Atlantic City. So,
I guess I'll have to give my clone heads to somebody else. More deserving.
I'll do it. I got a whole bunch of droids I haven't painted. They're still on sprues. So
there you go.
I don't own a single B2, so which is probably bad.
Yeah,
but
I'd show you the model on the webcam, but you're probably going to tell me it's unpainted. So
yeah, it's just gray.
All right. So the request we had for a topic was for Mike to rant about why Jedi are bad.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely paraphrased. It wasn't exactly, "Hey Mike, can you talk about why Jedi are bad?" But
that's what we're turning it into.
but I think that we can probably turn this into a constructive discussion by just talking about Jedi generically, and I can during that discussion tell you why.
Yeah.
All right.
So we did actually at one point promise a how to use Jedi and Sith episode.
Yep.
So we're gonna do that.
Yeah, this is it.
This is it. This is that episode.
Yep.
And then part 2, which will be next week.
Yep.
Is going to be, people seem to like how we basically went through and did the hot take ranking of the various Imperial commanders. So we're going to do that, but with all the Jedi, the Force users.
Yep. Okay. And for you, it'll be a week apart, but for us, it will be back to back.
Yes. So if you tune in next week and see that Jay and Mike are sitting in the same spot, wearing the same clothes, it's just because we recorded back to back, not because they wear the same thing every day.
And if you really like our attitudes and antics from this episode, I can guarantee it's going to continue to the next one.
Yes, because it will be even later than it is now.
Yeah. It's also, I think, a little bit easier to do it in person. There's a little bit more, Sorry, Kyle.
I know. I'm missing out.
Yep.
Zoom is not quite as fun. but it is.
Well,
It's okay. You're going to Atlantic City and I'm not. So
yeah.
I'm going to talk you into that.
maybe it's not me that we really have to talk into it. I have to talk some other people into
Okay, that's
making
fair.
sure that's okay. It's
Yep.
less of a me deal than a other people deal.
That is totally understood.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about. So, I want to like sort of structure this.
Sure.
So why don't we let's sort of go through a progression here. What sort of list should you construct around a Force user? Part 1.
Okay.
Part 2, what sort of battle cards should you take? And then part 3, how do you actually use them once they're on the table? If you want to intersperse your why Jedi are bad throughout those, please do.
I think it's probably best in part 3. Why? How to use Jedi on the table? You don't.
Here we go. Buckle up, everyone.
Buckle up.
All right.
We're going for a ride. All right. So, what was your first point?
I don't know.
All right. So every faction has
building a list around them.
Has access to at least 2 Force users. Is that right? Every faction has 2.
I mean, if you count Luke Skywalker and Operative Luke Skywalker as 2, then I think that's correct.
Yeah. So how do you? But the list structure is generally the same across the factions. So how do you build a list around a Force user?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least traditionally up until this point, I think that there are a couple different ways you can do this nowadays. It's really just a gun line, frankly. Jedi require an activation count that is high or at least average in order to function properly, due to them being a very timing sensitive unit on the tabletop, right? So you need to be able to perform, like in every list that you have a Jedi, you have to be able to confidently perform a last first, or at least be able to have that in your tool bag.
You need that Force user to go exactly when you want them to go.
Yeah.
Pretty much every turn.
And I would say, I mean, honestly, listening to Mike's points, like where my head was at before we started this, and you kind of confirmed it, is they're very similar to vehicles. It's the same kind of like thought process when you're putting a vehicle on the Empire side. I'm going to speak from that side, but on the Empire side, it's the same thought process. Like, okay, I need it to be high activation count. I need it to go last. I need, like all these are kind of these heavy point feature pieces, right? Are all operate the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, Kyle, I think you would call this a focus piece in one of your list building articles, right? Like anytime you have a Jedi in your army, it is the focus piece. Yeah, like just hands down. You may have some other units that can like masquerade as a focus piece. Like maybe you have a set of Wookiees, or you have a B2 unit or something in there. But at the end of the day, the focus piece in that list is Count Dooku or Luke Skywalker or whatever.
Well, and to that, those other, if you're going to have, we'll put it in quotes, right? Other focus pieces outside the Jedi, they should be there to support that Jedi, or to take heat off of them, or to like, it's always around like how they're going to support the Force user while they're on the table.
Yeah, I mean, often that's simply by like shooting things or doing objectives, which is, Mike used the term gun line. At least what that means in this context is you want a bunch of timing neutral units that are relatively simple to use.
I think timing neutral is the big key there.
Yeah.
Right? Like at the end of the day, I mean, Jay, to your point about it being like a vehicle, like you have to have an order on the Jedi, and like that's a non-option. I know that people hear me beat up Anakin a lot because of his flaw and stuff, but the reason his flaw is bad is because you don't get to put an order on your focus piece, right? So, any turn that you don't have an order on a Jedi is just you're playing with fire.
Yep. Yeah. So timing neutral units generally are like core units. Basically, most core units, with the exception of probably fleets and snows, and the sniper strike teams.
Yep.
In any list with the Force users, you should be sort of probably go into that well first, and then kind of building out from there. Other stuff that's good in focus piece units are like the generic commanders, because they're pretty timing neutral.
Do you think there's other stuff like I would say this is probably a bad example, but it's the only one that's popping in my head right now. Sometimes e-webs can be timing neutral. Sometimes it depends on how you deploy them, but I like having e-webs because they're cheap. And
they definitely bump your activation count, right?
Yeah.
I think the units similar to like the Rebel like rotary ATRT comes to mind as far as like fairly timing neutral, like can kind of like take a shot or two and not have an order token on it, and you kind of get away with it. I feel like there aren't a lot of units like that in the game that aren't either like just mainline core units or strike teams, you know.
Yeah, there's not very many. And generic commanders.
Yeah.
Or support commanders, however you want to. Like Leia is timing neutral relatively. So is Veers.
Totally.
I think there are a couple of exceptions to that, notably if you're running like a rebel melee skew, if you're doing like Luke with a bunch of Wookiees or Luke with Tauntauns. You know, that was a super popular list in the Tauntaun meta, was Commander Luke with 3 Tauntauns. I think that's like the one exception to that. You know, if you want to do like Vader dewbacks, that would also be pretty similar.
But you're kind of you're adding, like with the Tauntauns, for example, you're adding HQ uplink though, right? To get to get them at their orders.
In that example, yeah. But like for instance, on the Wookiee version, like you definitely don't have orders on your Wookiees a lot of turns, right?
Yeah.
You're playing with fire a little bit.
You are, and it's kind of all in on just like beating you up as fast as possible.
Yeah.
I don't really consider that list to be like a traditional Force user list.
Oh no, it's definitely not that.
Yeah.
if you're like just starting and you're like, I want to play Force user, but I don't know how to do it, don't do that. Do like a more traditional like.
I don't know. I actually think that list might actually be the easy. I think it might be the easiest Force user list to play, because it is very obvious what you have to do. You just run across the table and kill your opponent as fast as possible. I think as far as Force users go, traditional Force user play, I think, is a lot more complicated than how that list generally operates.
I agree. And my concern there is that you kind of like learn the wrong way to play a Force user.
That's fair.
That makes sense.
Yeah. If we're talking from like purely like learning how to play a Force user perspective, yeah, that's probably not a great place to start. But if you're just looking to win, you know, that's I think it plays very differently, but it's probably the easiest Force user list to play, I think.
So and I guess what we're saying is that in that list, you want to be super aggressive, but most 95% of the time with Force users, you're looking to be more like moving in the shadows to get into position of where you want to be before you strike.
Yeah, Force users are, I mean, we use the term control piece a lot, but that's essentially what a Force user is, right? Is they excel at controlling a small area of the battlefield around them. So you want to create a situation where a small area of the battlefield is important. And that, I guess we can transition to battle cards.
Yeah.
Look what I did there.
That was a great transition, guys.
I know, right?
We did it, boys.
Yeah, battle cards. I don't think they've changed much, really, for Force users in particular. I mean, I think you want sabotage, you want intercept.
Yep.
You want KP.
Yep.
And you probably want payload.
So I'll slight disagree. I think you want recover over KP or intercepts. Most Force users are good at recover for various reasons. The jumping ones are good at recover because they can get to that mid box pretty fast. A lot of them have, like Maul, for example, has infiltrate, which gets you even closer.
Maul is definitely uniquely, like if you're playing Maul, you definitely want recover over one of those things for sure.
Right. I mean, chances are if you have a jumping Force user, you have more mobility than your opponent unless they're running like a Mandalorian, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I specifically don't run recover unless I'm playing a Mando. Just because I've been kind of burnt on that too many times.
No, and I feel that.
Um,
And the non-jumping Force users, specifically Dooku and Palpatine, clearly can't get to that box as quickly, but they also have means to basically guarantee winning priority, which is really important on recover. Between Dooku's cunning and then giving your anger. So, and I also, for similar reasons, I also think you want hostage in there. Because in hostage exchange, the objective is a trooper unit, and Force users excel at moving trooper units around. So,
yeah, I think it definitely depends. Hostage, I don't know. There's that one game where I played 2 Jedi and really made.
Yes, I'm very aware of that.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. And but I don't know. I think that can sometimes go sideways pretty quickly.
It can, simply because there are situations where like you feel like you have to do something with your Force user early in a turn, and then they get withdrawn from and they die.
Yeah.
Which you always have to be careful about trying to avoid.
I think I'm gonna agree and disagree, Kyle. I think recover is good for 2 factions, and I think not good for 2 factions. So I think it's good for I think it's good for CIS and rebels based on their Force users. I would never take recover with a Vader list.
No, definitely not Vader.
And would really think about it with a Palpatine list.
I'd take it with Palpatine. Pull the strings is good for recover. Giving your anger is great for recover.
Yeah, but do you have, for pull the strings, do you have support along that Palpatine list that could handle a recover like that?
Yeah, you pick it up with your guard.
Yeah, I can see that. I definitely think the crux of this, I think, regardless of what your poison is don't take bombing run. Don't take breakthrough.
Yeah.
Like, both of those shouldn't be nowhere close to your list. Are we forgetting one, or is that all of them?
I think it's all of them.
I think as far as like non-objective related
that's
cards, I think you want limited visibility in all of your decks these days.
Yes.
Just because it's so good. I don't hate fortified positions, specifically with jumping Force users. Supply drop, because there's back to capsules in there,
and the dodge thing,
the field scanner.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Those are really great for Jedi. Off the top of my head, nothing else is really popping out as far as condition cards to take.
Deployments.
That's a real depends.
Yeah, I think it is a real depends. I think any close deployment, I think, is more often better, unless you're playing like Vader or Maul. In which case, I think you want to take advantage of their infiltrate. And Kyle, I think our opinions are going to differ on this a little bit.
I think so too, because you play Force users. Well, you play everything a little bit differently than me.
Yes.
So, as you know, I'm a very conservative. I prefer to play, with the exception of Jedi Luke when I'm running R2. Almost without exception, I prefer to go short edge to short edge with Force users. Because it's going to take time for your Force user to get there involved anyway. And short edge to short edge, I find there's more favorable line of sight blockers in that direction. And it's also like a narrower engagement range. So it's harder to flank your Force user. And it's also like harder to run away from them, right? Because your Force user is going, like along a narrow, it's basically like you're fighting in a hallway, right? Instead of in like a field. is how I think of it.
Yeah,
Anyway, and it's harder to avoid a force user in that context.
yeah, I think it really depends on the table. Jay was saying it kind of depends on like, because like the hallway thing can really backfire sometimes, right? Like,
Oh, if you're on an open table, you're screwed anyway.
yeah, but I think generally speaking, like if you're sitting on a long table edge, right? Like we're sitting at like a Legion board basically right now, like 6 feet to work with as far as like where your line of sight blocker is, as opposed to 3 feet can be a big difference sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's also dependent on the faction you're playing too. And I mean, there's so many factors to it, right? Because I get what you're saying, Kyle, but like I'm putting in my head, I'm like, yeah, but if I'm playing, let's say, Vader against Rebels, I kind of want to get close to them as soon as possible and just start killing them.
Yeah. Also, I think you can kind of turn the flanking thing on its head, right? Like if your force user's out on a wing and collapses one of their flanks, you can't really do that on like a narrow table, right? Or like on a narrow, because like everything is in the same place. Whereas like if you're playing like battle lines, you can sort of maybe like chop off a core unit on the end.
Potentially. I just think it's more important to prevent your force user from getting flanked than to potentially create a situation where you're isolating a unit on a flank with your force user. But the other thing too is,
go ahead.
It's just R2. We talked about the objectives and about how you want to create a situation where you're fighting over a small area. If you're going long edge to long edge and your opponent has R2 and you don't, you've basically just lost control of the area that you're fighting over, because you're essentially fighting over wherever the objective is, and then you also have to fight over wherever R2 is, and your opponent gets to pick where that second area is. So it's much harder to do that going short edge to short edge, because that's a much narrower corridor and a much longer distance for R2 to go. So that's why I say, like, unless I'm running Jedi Luke with R2, or I guess, Obi-Wan with R2.
Sure.
That's why that's the other reason I prefer short edge to short edge.
Notice, everyone, that he did not include the example of Anakin in R2.
So then you'd have to run Anakin.
Yeah, I know. So I did want to kind of follow up on you were talking about Jedi being flanked. Do you really feel like it's like possible most of the time to make it so that Jedi can't be flanked with silhouettes the way they are?
Yeah.
Kaboom! 1-0 Mike. Please go ahead.
It's definitely possible. It's much more difficult than it used to be. The silhouettes, almost without exception, create more area, particularly like above the shoulders. Like imagine that all your models are suddenly wearing like giant pointy shoulder pads that go out like this. That's basically what a silhouette does. And it's much easier to flank a silhouette than it is to flank a miniature. Usually. I think you could argue that even Commander Luke's area increases with the silhouette, even though that lightsaber's sticking up. If you found something tall enough, you could still like push him right up against it. And generally speaking, your opponent would have to go farther around the outside to hit him. I definitely think force users took a big value hit with silhouettes because of how much easier it is to, like you used to be able to kind of bury them behind a line of sight blocker aggressively towards your opponent's lines. That's much harder to do now because your opponent can just do like a cohesion swing around and shoot them. So
yeah, and they don't have to go half as far as they used to, because you can kind of get the corner of that silhouette.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I definitely, it makes like extra wide cohesions as just something in your toolbox that you should be using, I think, more often now.
Yeah, and that's another reason that you need to that I like to back up my force users with like gun lines, is because if your opponent does that, in theory they should be doing like a forward cohesion to do that, and you need to be in a position where you can punish that if they're taking shots on your force user like that.
Yeah, and I would say too, like the other thing you run into is silhouettes where like especially on some of these boards where you have like multiple pieces that are connecting together, you used to be able to hide a single unit like that in between there and you couldn't see it, where now it's like you have a little crack or something and you see like the top edge of the silhouette or like one of the sides and you're just like, oh okay, yeah, I guess you can shoot them now. So
Yeah, I mean that's another, like, please talk about terrain before.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's
yeah.
tiny little cracks in the terrain. Hopefully your opponent will agree that those are like, not shootable through, but who knows?
Who knows? What do you guys think to hemmed in for force users on blue, being blue player?
I mean, I would, I think generally speaking, I would see that as a good situation. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, because I was thinking about it like from again, you go from the experience you have, right? And I'm going from like a heavy, like an ATST, like I liked hemmed in with the ATST because it's like, no, this is fine. I'm just gonna sit here and kill stuff, right? And so I kind of like it.
I mean, it's kind of the best of both worlds because it's fairly common for a red player to concentrate most of their force in one of the red zones. And then, as blue, you're essentially like starting in the middle of the table.
Yeah.
So you're basically creating a 3x3 and you're fighting over a 3x3, right? And so not only are you like getting sort of the narrow attack corridor
Mhm.
that you would get going long edge to long edge, but you also start much closer to your opponent than you would on like long march.
Yeah.
So for me, hemmed in is like the perfect force user deployment because you get to start close and you get to probably fight over a small area.
So, all right, Kyle. All right, Kyle. Kyle, okay. If you had to rank your battlefield, like what are your 4 battlefields in order? Or deployments, sorry. What are your 4 deployments in order? Hemmed in being number 1?
The 4 that I would take with a force user.
Yeah. And what you would want to see, like ideally in order, what you would want to see.
Hemmed in, roll out, long march, major offensive. Unless I'm running R2. And then it's hemmed in, danger close, disarray battle lines.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree. I have a hard time agreeing with long march and roll out just because if I'm on the opposite side of the table, I'm happy that your force user is range 6 away from me at the start of the game. Personally, that's just like how I feel about it.
Yeah,
I
get that.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing.
Go ahead, Kyle.
So another thing that's important for a force user is not just hitting your opponent quickly, but hitting your opponent at the same time as the rest of your stuff. And I find that that's also easier to do when you're going long edge to long edge. But
I think that's very fair. Particularly, I think, you're coming at this a little bit from a droid perspective.
Oh, no question.
Right? which I do think informs some of the conversation we're having right now.
I will say, yeah. So like long march is an interesting one because it can go either way. Like, like what Mike's saying, oh, you're range 6, great. Yeah, just walk into my gun line. Yeah. But at the same time, too, I've found that when playing both, because I've played Vader and Luke, and when playing either one of them, even with Vader's speed 1, but people like underestimate how fast and how quick you can actually get into the danger zone.
Yeah.
With a force user, and they kind of underestimate that. They're like, oh, I'm on long march, I can move up a little bit and be fine and be here and here. And then next thing they know, like turn 2, you're like, oh no, I'm gonna force pull you and I'm gonna do this. And and they're like, whoa. So I think it goes either way, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably not run a long march with Vader.
See, it's funny because I actually, like, of all of the force users that I'm thinking of, Vader's like the one I would run on long march. It's strictly because Vader has a very difficult time with relocating once he gets someplace, and Long March kind of makes it so that like once you're there, you're there. You don't have to like operative Luke can kind of like, if he's fighting in one intercept zone, he can kind of move over to another and deal with it if something happens. But Vader doesn't really have that luxury.
Yeah, he can't reposition.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point about Long March. Basically, like he wants to be fighting in a hallway, right?
Right. Yeah. Which, but yeah, I feel like as your speed and jump goes up, flexibility on that increases pretty substantially.
It does.
Side tangent. Do you think we could ever see a competitive board that has a hallway system like that? Where you could like fleets and Jedi and or Force users could become more
a competitive board?
Yeah.
No.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, the maybe most glaring one is that you could never use a vehicle.
Yeah, all right.
That's but
fair.
Also with that short of sight lines, that would be like the that'd be like the opposite end of the spectrum of playing on an open table.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be cool.
Which is more common, but equally as bad, honestly.
Yeah, just a question.
I mean, like, I think for narrative play, like, go for it.
Yeah.
If you want to reenact Vader's hallway scene, I'm all for that, or I think we're at this point, Luke's hallway scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so good.
I think either of them would be more than fine. Cool. So does that kind of cover it for cards, I think?
Yeah, I think we can hit like how, I mean, we've sort of already hit some of this, but how to actually use the Force user.
Yeah. So
delicately
is definitely I think a reasonable way to describe it. 5 out of the 6 turns every game, and sometimes 6 out of 6 turns, at least when you're starting out, your Force user should be the thing that you activate last in a turn. I think that's like a really good hard and fast rule that you should like really try to not break if at all possible. And if you feel like at any point you have to break that rule, chances are you screwed up, and you should consider why.
It means they're exposed, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because you want to avoid your Force user getting exposed. Because like it's not weird. It used to be weird, but it's now not weird for a Force user to die in as little as like 2 shots.
Yeah.
That's the thing that can happen, or even 1 with like a 5's fire support.
Yeah, I feel like and Mike can probably agree with this, as guys who've played Vader for a long time, that always just seemed to be the case. Like Vader seems like he's you're like 8 and red dice, I'm gonna be fine, and the next thing you know, like it's just over.
Yeah.
Part of that though too is like if you go first with your Force user, and you either kill the unit that you engage with or they withdraw or something. Yeah. Like that's not 2 shots. That's like 9 shots.
It's all of them. Anytime your Force user is out in an exposed position for like more than 1 activation, you're really playing with fire, I think. And even, back in the day, and one of the reasons I think we actually have silhouettes is because Luke's holding his lightsaber up in the air like a champ, right? And people used to shoot it. Mm-hmm. And it matters when, you take a sniper shot to like Luke or Vader or whatever, and you roll a die, and 50% of the time you take a wound, right?
Yeah.
And wounds on Jedi are very precious. You can't really, like, once you're down to like 3, you're done taking any chances. And the fact of the matter is that, and this is kind of why I brought up the silhouettes conversation earlier, is that you want to have your Jedi buried at all times. Like if your opponent can see your Jedi silhouette and effectively hit it, because they're at range, you're in trouble.
Yep. So by buried, you mean either behind the line of sight blocker or in melee with a unit that has already activated.
Correct. You need to be basically, if they can see your Jedi silhouette, it better be because they are not an eligible target to be shot at, because they're in melee with a unit that is already activated.
Yep.
And so going back to like always activating last, this sets it up so that you always know your Jedi is safe, right? You have full information at all times to know what your opponent can and cannot do to attack your Jedi. If you go earlier in the turn and put your Jedi in a place that seems safe, your opponent can then move, cohere weirdly, and potentially take a shot that you didn't see because it was difficult to tell on the table. Whereas if you still have a face-up order token and they try to do that, if they do that and are successful at it, you at least know where is not safe. And for this follow-up shot that is inevitably going to be taken by the next unit that goes on their side, you can readjust your position.
And this is hard to do because Jedi have laser swords, and it's really fun to cut things with laser swords.
Yeah. Well, and they have all, and we're gonna probably dive deeper into this in part 2, but like they also have all these special abilities and keywords and stuff that make you in your mind be like, I'll be fine. I've got this and this and this. I'm gonna get a dodge token and I'm gonna do this, and they're almost like designed to like trick you into making bad decisions. Like
we call it the Luke rage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is why I lost the world's final, right? Like one of probably a couple of reasons, but like I charged in there with Luke. I'm like, oh, there's only a couple things left to activate. I've got a dodge token. He'll be fine. Spoiler alert, he wasn't.
Yeah. Literally anytime that thought goes through your head of, oh, there's a couple things that could get me, but I'll be fine, you should listen to that and then do the opposite.
Yeah.
Like every time. It's hard to fight a little bit.
It is. You really have to take like the forces for knowledge and defense Obi-Wan Kenobi approach and just really like restrain yourself, because don't get me wrong, there are times when it is good and necessary to murder things with your lightsaber, but you have to really assess how your Jedi is going to be exposed after you do that.
Yeah,
they're almost like it's weird, like, because in all the media that we consume, right, they're like, to use D&D references, they're like the paladin, right? They're out there like tanking and like they're taking out hundreds of guys, but really they're more like a thief. Like you got to keep them.
They're much more like a rogue.
Yeah. Like you got to keep them in the shadows, sneak up behind things,
they're like a rogue spell sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. You really just need to have full information at all times. And I think what it comes down to is that eventually you'll either find an opening. So inevitably in every game, and maybe I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, is you'll find that there's going to be a window where you've either like navigated the game very well with the rest of your list so that your Jedi can just sit there in their bubble that's protected and not worry about doing something aggressive because the rest of your list has operated properly and you played a good game. Or you need to make up some lost ground, which inevitably ends with your Jedi crossing an open field for multiple activations, and they kind of have to put the game on their back, and I think a lot of the time we can get deceived when we see a Jedi do that and do it successfully and be like, oh, they can do this all the time, right? And the fact of the matter is that that's just not something that should be a last resort emergency press here button only button, as opposed to this is how this unit operates.
Yeah, I mean, you want to force your opponent to have to come into your Jedi's threat range. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to force your Force users into your opponent's army when they're on the opposite side of the table. Which is why when we talk about battle cards, we talk about creating situations where you're fighting over a small area and then getting your Jedi or your Sith, whatever, to that small area and sitting there, basically. And that's why line of sight blockers are super important for that.
Well, and I guess for those people that have never played a Force user, I know we've all seen it where in one game you could see Vader take a full ATST shot or a full, like he could take like 9 to 12 shots, block them all and just be fine. And then the very next game, he can literally die. Like the same, you could line up the same thing and it's just a 50-50. And I think anytime, to Mike's point, you're saying, yeah, I got a 50-50, I'm making this, you stop, just stop what you're doing and figure out what, if you can get closer to 100% of making it, right? Like whatever a different move is.
50-50 is not good odds. I just want to be real clear about that. Like when you're talking about defensive saves, like on Jedi, like 50-50 doesn't go your way. Like
the Stormtrooper unit.
Yeah.
Right. It is no more durable than a Stormtrooper unit.
Yeah.
So like when you put it in that context, all of a sudden you kind of take a step back and you're like, hey, all right.
Yeah.
Like even like a phase 2 clone unit that's like, 3 up all the time, like still eventually dies because it fails saves,
Yeah, you still fail saves 33% of the time, which is a lot.
Right, but which I would again like to say are not good odds when you're talking about your 200-point piece that if it dies, you lose the game. So
that's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, I also think that like when we're talking about Jedi and what they can and cannot do and what they can or maybe should and shouldn't do, it's really important to understand the measurements and ranges that are involved in what they can do. So let's for a second, you are operating on the Jedi always go last, train of thought that I might maybe call it the Kyle Dornbos school of thought. And so if your Jedi is operating at the end of the turn after everything has gone, their threat range is basically, it's a little shorter than range 2, but they can, their safe range is a little bit more than that. It's basically speed 2 plus a speed 1 move because they can force push something into them.
Range 2 plus the speed 1 move.
Yeah. Is that what is that not what I said?
You said speed 2.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, my bad.
Yeah.
Sorry. So range 2 plus a speed 1 move. So because, and if you've gotten this far, we haven't actually talked about force upgrades yet. I'm sure we'll talk about them at some point. But the mandatory one on every force user other than Palpatine is force push.
Yeah.
And you should kind of, I think in every game, think of your Jedi as just force push on a stick, and anything else you get out of it, it's kind of just bonus.
Which force push is amazing, so that's not like...
Yeah, I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Just right. Clear. Definitely worth 160 points. But force push increases the range in which you can make yourself safe at the end of a turn by so normally you would move, maybe you would get a free attack off charge or relentless or whatever your Jedi has that's cool and super and awesome, and then you got a speed 1 move from force push to bury them in another unit, which is incredibly important, I think, when we're talking about how to play a force user properly.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to go with them last if your opponent moves a unit within that area, within that roughly 6, it's like 15 inches basically.
Yeah.
You can go with your force user pretty much as soon as that happens. Like if your opponent does that on the first activation of the turn, go for it.
Right.
Get your force user in there and bury him. Make sure you cohere those dudes around him, because you do get to do the cohesion when you do force push. Make sure you cohere him such that you can't get like meleeed on that same turn.
Yeah.
But you don't always have to go last. If you're playing against somebody good, they're probably not going to make that mistake. Right.
Yeah.
Unless they don't have a choice, like if they need it to interact with an objective or something like that. But yeah, you can go with them as soon as it's basically you're in a situation where you can safely bury them in an activated unit. The ideal situation is you can like attack something else that hasn't activated and then bury yourself in an activated unit. Sometimes that happens. That's a little more doable if you have like a unit that has relentless and saber throw.
It generally also happens a little bit more once like your force user has like engaged the enemy.
Yeah,
it tends to happen a little bit more frequently because everything's kind of going and it turns into a big flurry of lightsaber blades at that point. But the reason I think that this specifically is so important is because often the difference between a good Jedi and a bad Jedi is the diving in, whatever that looks like, and you can either do it really well or you can do it really badly, and there's really no in between.
There's not.
Yeah.
There's also no experience level at which you're immune to doing that, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, I think, not to continue bringing up me and Kyle's games, but
here we go.
The last game we played, I think, was a good showcase of like I knew what Maul's threat range is: speed 2 plus speed 1 move, right? And I didn't enter it like ever, and Kyle just kind of had to, like, I don't know, I eventually worked around so that I flanked the Jedi silhouette. But like, if you're playing against a good opponent that knows how to deal with the Jedi, and this is kind of segueing, I guess, into why I think Jedi are bad.
Good.
We
made it.
We're getting there. Is that if your opponent is able to basically stay at range 3 at all times, there's really never an opening.
Yeah, and that's why the objectives are so important, and where you need to set up a situation where your opponent, if they want to do that, they basically can't win because they can't interact with the objectives.
Right.
And at least in our game, you actually did do that once to interact with your evaporator, but you were able to do like a last first to do that, such that I never actually had activated Maul when that situation was in existence.
Basically, I forced a situation where you would like have to activate with Maul first.
Yeah.
Right. And then leave him in a super exposed position.
Right. Although with Maul specifically, there is a tool that he has that makes that less of a problem for him, and that's because he can move, do the force push thing, and then take a standby.
Yes, he is very unique in that situation.
So that if he melees a unit that has not activated yet, once they activate and then withdraw, he just spends his standby to re-engage him, and you're fine.
He's the only unit that can do
he's
that.
literally the only one that can do that.
Yeah. So crazy. Yeah, and I would say before you get to some more of the negatives, for newer players, if you're listening to this, when they're talking about engaging, they don't necessarily mean attacking.
Yeah, that's a big point. Like,
yes,
the majority of the time that you actually dive with a force user, it's generally it's wrong to eliminate the unit you're diving into.
Yeah,
whether that means you don't attack or you like don't use all your peers, or you just like move, force push something into you and give up the free attack because you couldn't base something without force pushing it into you. Like, those are all reasonable ways to get into it. Your objective on the dive is not to kill something. It's just to basically protect yourself in the enemy army so that you're safe.
Yeah. I mean, it's like what you're doing is you're setting up for moves in like 3 moves ahead, right? And you're just trying to get into a position of power at that point where you can kind of control a little bit more of your space. And I can't, I love that, like, okay, attack, but maybe don't spend all your pierce. Like, I don't think people really realize that they don't have to do that, right?
Pierce is
Like,
optional.
Pierce is optional.
yeah, like that's a huge one. Also,
Playing a little bit with fire.
You are.
Depending on what you're
anytime
attacking.
you're attacking, yeah, you depending on how many unit or minis there are, but like or wounds, but like yeah, that's something I always tell people. I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't attack there. Like, just let that ride, because like, again, if you're playing the 50-50, like, I don't know, I might kill him or I might not. Just don't play that game.
Well, and I guess to explain a little bit more why that's important is that if you kill that unit, you now start the turn exposed.
Yeah.
And you want to be going preferably as late in the chain as you can, or until you can embed your unit into something else. But like at the start of the next turn, you can neither bury your unit safely or be safe, right? So you all of a sudden start the turn in a predicament.
Yeah. Now there are a couple. So let's talk about the situations where you actually do want to go first with your force user and kill something, because those do exist.
Yep.
If doing so basically wins you an objective, you want to do that. There are a couple of cards, command cards specifically, where you can do like so much damage with that first hit that it's justified. And now you will die is like the token one, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Where you can literally just kill half your opponent's army with Palpatine before they get to do something. Some lesser versions of that same effect are Son of Skywalker and Fear, Surprise, Intimidation for Dooku. With those latter two in particular, you want to make sure that the rest of your army can kind of follow up and like also attack on that same turn.
Yep.
Because Son of Skywalker is great for, you will delete whatever target you're in melee with. Like it's like essentially, especially if you're playing with Jedi Luke, it's pick a unit in range of Luke and just pick it up off the table. That's basically what Son of Skywalker is, but it's also usually just one unit.
Yeah,
so
you'll
you
be
have
lucky
to,
if you get to.
Yeah.
right. So you have to be kind of you have to make sure that either that one unit that you're eliminating, like you're really going to make it count, like you're eliminating another focus piece. Maybe you're one-shotting your opponent's ATST or something like that, which has happened.
Yeah, I've seen that before.
Yeah. Or something to that effect. Then you're making it count just with the saber swing, but you also want to make it count with the rest of your units. Because once you've done that with Dooku or Luke or whoever, your Jedi or Sith is going to be in the middle of the opponent's army, hopefully with a dodge token, but exposed, and your opponent is going to spend the rest of your turn shooting them. So there are situations where you can sort of justify that sacrifice because they're not shooting the rest of your army. And if you're hitting all of their unactivated units with ranged attacks from the rest of your force, which hopefully is reasonably intact, you can have a situation where you delete a unit, your opponent spends the rest of their turn shooting your force user, but their capability to do that degrades over the course of your turn because you're shooting their remaining units with all of your units who are doing so without reprisal, basically. And there are situations where that can happen, specifically with those 3 cards that I just listed.
Yeah.
I don't think I would try something like that with like Maul or Obi-Wan. Well, maybe Obi-Wan, you could do that with Hello there because he gets
Hello, there's the standby token that's pretty helpful there.
Yeah, as are the possible pile of dodges that you're getting from that card.
Yeah.
So probably you could do that with Obi-Wan. I would never do that with Maul. I would probably not do it with Vader, although Implacable potentially.
Implacable is best on at the end so that you
Implacable is better when you can just go last twice in a row.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe Vader's might. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know.
It's hard to say.
Yeah, that one's situational. I would say though, like the trap with Implacable, I have always found is that you're like, oh, I'll get Vader back before anything bad happens, and you won't. Like you won't.
You just take a wound and then he dies before he gets to go again. Yeah, you definitely want to try and do it back to back. I do think that like any Force user can be in the situation that you reference where like activating first can be a thing that you do, but I think
you want to make sure that it like wins you the game when you do
if it doesn't win you the game, it's wrong.
Yeah,
it's basically how that pans out, and like it has to win you the game like 100% of the time. Just to be clear, like if it wins you the game like 85% of the time, you probably still don't do it. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so like that's kind of, I would say, some of the downfall of Jedi is that like a lot of decisions you make, you almost like, I find in Legion that sometimes you can make decisions and there's some forgiveness in the game, you know, because of the way dice work. But with Jedi, you almost have to be certain of what you're doing, or Force users, you have to be certain of what you're doing and know what you're going to do next and like 2 moves ahead, because otherwise you're going to get punished so hard. And so that's the downside is some lists are different, but like a lot of lists with Legion, I feel like you can kind of make some like small mistakes and you get punished, but not very hard. But like Jedi Force users, it's like you make a small mistake, it seems to compound way faster than any other Legion unit.
I mean, would you ever take a Stormtrooper unit and put it at range 1 of everything in your opponent's army and expect it to live?
No.
I mean,
no.
The answer is no, right?
Right.
Like, and we've already gone over like Jedi are not more hardy than a Stormtrooper unit, really, right? Like that's all they are. You know, if they have a dodge token, they can get deflect for like an attack or 2. But you know, at its core, like if you stuck a Stormtrooper out like in front of your whole army and it was range 1 of everything that they had, like you would expect that unit to die.
Yeah.
You know,
which is why Jedi and Sith do have lots of tools like Force Push.
They totally do,
to make it so that situation doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah, but yes, they do. But I find that a lot of people that play Force users, even you said like veterans, right? Like you get a little, you're like, it's Maul. Everything's gonna be fine. It's Luke. He'll be fine, right? I've got.
I literally did that in one of my Invader games this season, like, and I still ended up winning that game because the dice bailed me out essentially. Yeah. But I just gifted Maul to my opponent, essentially. Not our game; it was a different clone match.
Though you gifted me Maul in our game too by running him away.
Not sure how much of a choice I had.
I don't. Well, that's the thing, and I actually kind of like. So we've talked about how to use Force users kind of in a little bit in a vacuum at the moment.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, if you're playing against a good opponent, they're going to be negotiating your Force users range at range 3 very intentionally. And the thing that we, the stick in the mud, if it were, is that they're also going to be taking standby tokens on their units. So that even if you try and wait it out, that range 2 plus a speed 1 move threat range all of a sudden has to navigate 1 or more standby tokens in order to make it happen. And this is where I strongly feel that if you're unable to get that standby token off, you're often in a no-win scenario. In that, like, if they go right before you Jedi, they take a standby token, so that basically you have to take like 10 dice to the face just to get there. You've lost all your advantage.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, and that's why it's 2 things: activation count and long range units in support of your Jedi are so important.
Yes. Like this is why sniper rifles in Jedi lists are like, people are like, oh, snipers, why would you, again, why are snipers so good? Well, stripping standbys is huge, specifically in this situation.
Yeah.
One of the issues with that, though, is that since they are a timing neutral unit, you often don't have orders on your snipers, right? And particularly in a lot of Jedi lists, and we haven't talked about this portion of it yet, is like you're often playing standing orders. to make
Mhm.
sure you go last, right?
Yep.
Which means the only order, unless you're playing a CIS list, in which case it's a little different, is the only order on the table that you have is your force user. So, if you draw your snipers early in the turn or whatever, you're very susceptible to being kind of standbyed out of making a play.
Yeah,
Yep.
and that's the weird. Yeah, that order control with a force user, outside of CIS, like, man, if you have too much diversity in your list, which normally I'm a fan of, but when you're playing a force user, it's like, I gotta really not have a ton of diversity because my order control is gonna be real bad here. So it's like you want core, special forces, maybe a commander, and your force user, whether they're a commander or operative, and that's about it. That's all you want in there. I know I was saying E-webs were they're nice in certain lists, but man, yeah, when that order control stuff comes through, it really can bog down what what you're trying to do.
For sure. So Kyle, I guess I would, as the foremost expert on things with lightsabers, how do you navigate the no-win scenario?
So first of all, I'm not sure I'm maybe on this cast, but the foremost expert on force users. But what no-win scenario are you talking about?
In the you look, for instance, and I don't like actually hate it, but again, going back to our game, right, where
Mhm.
you basically you're playing like Maul B2s, right? You've got very few ways to strip standbys. Like how are you navigating a game like that when you're playing against somebody who is like playing the anti-Jedi game properly?
I mean, you have to win by zoning, basically, which you were able to shut down via flanking.
Yep.
Because
So what do you mean by zoning?
so essentially putting your force user in a spot where if your opponent wants to do anything useful to the rest of your army or interact with the objectives, they have to move within your force user's threat range.
Mhm.
Which in the game that Mike is referencing, Maul was in such a spot for a reasonable portion of the game until he was able to go wide around the side and basically force him out of that location by flanking him.
Right.
Now, arguably, I could have, I had B2s. In hindsight, I could have used those B2s to basically prevent that flank more
You could have been more aggressive.
stubbornly than I did. Yeah. And I would and should have done that. And that's where supporting your force user with the rest of your list comes in. Like in that game, I think I had put like Maul and two of my B2s over on that one side of the table he was on, and I should have just put Maul over there and put all of my other B2s basically in that other area where he was flankable to prevent that. And that was just a situation too where I didn't even appreciate that shot existed based on the terrain.
Hashtag silhouettes.
Yeah, well, it's not even silhouettes. We've talked about this. We talked like for an entire episode about this game, but it was one of those stupid terrain pieces where from top down the box is like this, and like the top box is like hanging over such that it looks like it's blocking line of sight from a certain direction, but you can actually see underneath it.
Yeah.
So like notionally it makes like a slight L or like X shape, but it really doesn't. But yeah, it's like, so you might be forced into a situation where you just have to close the gap and rely on your dodge token. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. But that's also terrain relevant. That table we played on was an open table.
It was very open, which, however, I mean, like, I think a lot of people listening are likely to be playing on it was much more of like a real life table, right?
Yes,
like it was much more something that you're likely to see at a big tournament, even if there's good terrain, right? Like
Correct.
that was a good real life table.
I would be satisfied if I showed up to a real life tournament and there was a table like that.
Yeah,
it's just by our TTS standards, it was an open table.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think, at the end of the day, the way you win the no-win scenario is like you have to have pieces there to support your list, right? Like the rest of the list has to be able to work to support your force user, and your force user can't do it on their own. Whether it's snipers or whether you're aggressively moving up with B2s, you can't take a force user and expect them to operate as this like insular piece of your army.
Right. And that's partially why I like that list specifically, the Maul B2s, because your B2s kind of act as like a second hammer piece. Whereas if Maul's soaking up all your opponent's attention, the B2s just walk in and be like, hey,
we're here.
We're here.
Here's your party.
Did you forget about us? I got a rocket launcher, So yeah, that's why I like that list specifically, is because in those situations you can kind of mitigate that a little bit. But I think this touches on one of your why force users are bad things, which is that they're very terrain dependent. And if you're showing up to an event with multiple rounds, even at a good event, like we hold up LVO and Adepticon as standards for what good terrain looks like. Something like 20% of those tables are probably still not ideal or not good for a force user. And if you're talking about an event like that where you have to win 6 or 7 or 8 rounds in a row, like you're going to get one of those tables at least once in an important game, if not multiple times. So, you have to consider that when you're throwing a laser sword in your list.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I guess, I've decided I'm not gonna go on a rant, but but I do think that like I think we've talked about force users kind of in a skilled way here, but I think it's also highlighted a lot of the problems I have with it is that if you're playing a competent opponent that knows what they're doing, all of a sudden, not only do you have to basically play perfectly, you have to play the rest of your list perfectly too. Like everything, the terrain's got to be right. You've got to play your force user perfectly. You've got to make sure that you have the pieces that are in your army backing up your force user properly, going when they need to be going, and doing the things that they need to be doing. And those are a lot of things that even like top level players sometimes can't get to align, even if they're on their A game, because sometimes the dice say no, or the table's not right, or whatever, and it's really not that difficult to play properly around those things. I think as far as skill caps go, I think playing a force user is one of the hardest things you can do in this game. And if you mess up, you just lose. Like it's just over.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you're paying like almost 200 points to kind of like put yourself in a position of like hardship, right? For those games where you could spend that 200 points otherwise to make your life a little bit easier almost.
I feel like we've shorted force users a little bit in this conversation as to the unique things that you are paying for that they can do that no other unit can do.
Yeah. I guess we could cover that on part 2, right? When we go through them.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, they can reliably do damage once they are buried in your opponent's army.
Yep.
And once that happens, they create very awkward decisions for your opponent.
100%. I mean, once they're buried, a lot of times you won the game.
Yeah, you basically just win.
Like it's tough to lose from that position,
assuming you're giving warm hugs correctly and all that.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, again, like as long as you're not making a mistake,
right? Which once you're in that point, it's easier to kind of see what your decision tree needs to be.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we were shorting them. I think it was more of, I think everybody's capable of what they can do. That's the problem, that that those capabilities that they have almost become a crutch. And so I think the idea of telling people like, okay, yes, you have this powerful force user that has all these cool keywords and all this great, stuff that it can do, but here's what you got to do in order to make that stuff possible.
Well, so the one thing that force users are excellent at that literally no other unit can do is reposition your opponent's units. There's a myriad of uses for that. Force push is the primary way that happens. There are other ways that is done, like scatter, which both Vader and Dooku have. Force choke can be a tool for that. Cards like Dooku's 3-pip. I mean, there was a Team League game last season I won where I had basically like just Dooku left, and it was key positions, and he single-handedly removed 4 units from my opponent's key position on the last turn. With I played You Disappoint Me, so I moved a unit with that. I moved a unit with Force Push. I force choked a unit leader that was on the KP, and then he killed one with his lightsaber. Like nobody else can do that.
Yeah.
And even if you have an equivalent point value of units that can kill things, the thing that makes Force users uniquely able to, like, clearly you could just shoot a unit off the KP too, right? But then you're talking about rolling dice.
Yep.
Whereas, Force Push or You Disappoint Me or Force Choke is literally you just point to a model and you say this happens.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like the fact that they can, like, their effects happen 100% of the time that you have them is a huge deal, right? Like that's part of their staying power, for sure.
And even lightsabers, which do involve rolling dice, usually have reliable dice, and they usually have high Pierce values. So there are exceptions to that, clearly. But for the most part, like, if you want to pick a unit to pick 3 to 4 models up off the table on a given turn, it's harder to bet better than a lightsaber. Even if those units have especially if those units have red saves. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with that assessment. It's just, I don't think my argument is definitely not like once they're in, they're difficult to use. I think it's getting them to the stage where all of those things are relevant, I think is the problem that I find, like
closing the gap.
Yeah. Once you're using those abilities and you're in there and you're doing so safely, I think like that's where Force users are super strong, right? Like that's where they get good. It's just getting there is super difficult.
Yeah,
it is. I mean, I've played really in every tournament except for season 3 of Invader. I've played a Force user. And yes, I'm aware that that I did well in that season.
But I wasn't gonna go there, but
hey Gal, whatever.
So Kyle, exactly how many Invader Leagues have you won with Force users?
0.
And how many Invader Leagues have you won?
1.
And how many Invader Leagues have you played in with a Force user?
4.
Okay.
But it's not as if I've done poorly in those other 4.
No.
But you didn't win.
But you didn't win.
Yes. Kyle.
Yeah. It's okay.
That's true.
I didn't win either.
Me neither, guys.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. It is the primary gripe with Force users is one of consistency.
Yeah. I mean, they can be the most powerful thing on the table. They are the most powerful thing on the table at all times. It's just, the amount of times that you get to swing that hammer is sometimes 0.
Right.
And that is,
and when that
enough.
happens, you just lose.
Yeah.
I agree.
So do we want to wrap part 1 up here and swing into part 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. So part 2 will be next week.
Yep.
We are the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Jay.
Stay fresh, cheese bags.